49th day of our 40-day Lent journey, which means there's only 11 days yet to go before we reach the end of that 40 days. And paradoxically, this is the 11th day since the Diocese of Fargo has shut down public masses and church events. And so as we come on this fifth Sunday of Lent, this is the third week we've been with the Gospel of John, and also the third week that we've heard a story of someone who makes a journey of faith, and which I think is what John would like all of us to do, enter into a journey of faith in our discipleship in this Lenten season. John's Gospel, just as a context again, was a Gospel that was richly done in the theme of understanding the high person who Christ was. He puts together the Gospel in a series of 7 signs that Jesus works in his public life. And today's resurrection of Lazarus is the 7th sign, sort of the last day of creation, like the world was created in 7 days. In John's Gospel, this is the culminating sign of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ in his public work. But it's also the third time in the Sunday readings that we've had a journey of a soul from sort of superficiality into the depths of the spiritual life. From 2 weeks ago, we had the Samaritan woman who was caught up in the cultural norms of her day and saw Jesus, who asked for a drink, as a Jew who shouldn't be asking a woman. And by the time that story ends, this woman ends up being an evangelist, and she's inviting her town to come and meet Jesus. A story of a journey of a soul. Last week, it was the story of a blind man who starts off blind. Jesus heals him, and he's ridiculed a lot by the religious authorities of his day and age. But he grows in faith from seeing Jesus as simply a man who did something to him. And then as he's pushed, he becomes a prophet. And then he sees him as someone from God. And then all of a sudden at the end of the story, he calls Jesus Lord. All while this is going on in these stories, there's this side groups of people who are unperceptive about what's going on. They don't see. And so it is with this story today with Lazarus. It's the sort of, for most of us, living kind of a level of superficiality. But when Christ enters the scene, we're called into a deeper and deeper relationship with who God is. And so this story today starts off kind of interestingly in an odd way. Jesus is told that his good friend Lazarus is ill. And Jesus says he delays for 2 days. That seems so unpastoral. Why wouldn't he go right away if his friend was ill and his sisters were asking for him to come? And he also says something odd. This is not to end in death, but it's for the glory of God. And like I said, he stays 2 days longer before he goes. And when he decides to go, his apostles, interestingly, remind him, Bethany, where you're being asked to go to Jesus, is not far from Jerusalem, only a couple miles. And you've had some problems in Jerusalem. They tried to stone you the other time. So maybe you don't want to go there, And Jesus has said that he's going to go to awaken Lazarus, who's asleep. And the apostles, who are unperceptive, think he's just sleeping. And they say, well, he'll rise, he'll wake up. And Jesus has to say, no, he's dead. And now I need to go. And impetuously, Thomas, one of the apostles, says in the story as you read it, well, let's go and die with him. They think, okay, sort of as an ill-formed disciple yet, that if Jesus is going to die, he's been a good companion to us, we'll go with him. And if he's going to die as he goes to Jerusalem, we'll die with him. Still understanding that this is kind of just Jesus is not going into a good political setting. And this is not what's going on in the story at all, until we get into the deeper parts here. And when he arrives, it says that, it's been 4 days that Lazarus has been in the tomb. And that was a Jewish way of acknowledging that if someone had been dead for 3 days, he was truly dead. They didn't have the scientific kind of ways of evaluating death as we do. And so it had been not uncommon that maybe someone was presumed to be dead and on the second day rose. He kind of came out of a coma. But no one had ever risen after 3 days. So if it's been 4 days that Lazarus has been in the tomb, that means he's really dead. And so he comes, and Martha meets him. And Martha is a little different than the disciples, who are, like I said, a little unperceptive of who Christ is and what he's doing. And she does the normal kind of natural thing. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus says, well, he will rise. And she says, yeah, I know. And on the last day. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And you're kind of like, what's kind of going on here? So she calls Mary. And Mary, her sister, comes. And she, like Martha, her sister, laments to Jesus. If you'd been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And she falls at the feet of Jesus, kind of like in a worship mode. And then all of a sudden, this is when Jesus says, where have you laid him? And this one, John's Gospel, has some interesting kind of language and words here that are important to understand. Because the people respond when Jesus says, where have you laid him? They say, come and see. And when people say, come and see in John's Gospel, we take people to death, to tombs where the dead live. But earlier in John's Gospel, at the very beginning, when John the Baptist told his disciples, there's the Lamb of God, and they go to follow him, and they ask Jesus, where are you staying? Jesus says, come and see. The very same words that are used here. But when Jesus says, come and see, he invites people to life and depth and a richness. It seems like John is trying to remind us, we in our limitedness, when we invite people, the best we can do is now take Jesus to a tomb. It's all over. Lazarus is dead, and they're all crying, it says. And for the first time, John used the word, Jesus is perturbed and deeply troubled. And all of a sudden he sees the people crying, and Mary crying, and Martha crying. And he says to the people, take away the stone. And interesting, again, most of our responses on a natural level. Well, there's going to be a stench, Lord. You wouldn't want to do that. See, we're not into the depth of where Jesus wants to take us. He wants them to take away the stone. And it says at that moment again, it used that word, he's perturbed and deeply troubled. And the word that's used there is, this is something of a deep, deep angst in Jesus. He knows whatever he does at this moment, in this time, is of cosmic proportions. That's what that deep, perturbed, and deeply troubled is about. And then he prays that the Father will give him the power to ultimately raise. So the stone, is taken out and taken away. And after Jesus has prayed to the Father, interestingly in John's Gospel, as Father Ray Brown, who did a commentary on this Gospel, it says Jesus, in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! That very word, in a loud voice or shouted, is what will happen in the Passion story of Jesus when Pilate asks the crowd, what should I do with him, this Jesus? And they will say, crucify him! Crucify him! That's kind of the difference John wants to see. We are limited beings. We don't have that depth of faith. When Jesus shouts, it will bring forth life. When we do that, we tend to invite death because we haven't yet entered into the mystery of the person of Jesus Christ. That's what disciples do. And when he shouts and Lazarus comes out, it's interesting in John's Gospel, he says, not only roll away the stone, but untie him. Now in Jesus' resurrection, someone doesn't roll away the stone, it's rolled away when the women go early in the morning. And they find in the tomb, Peter and the beloved disciple, the funeral garments laid in the head thing laid in a place by itself. Someone else, the Father, Jesus himself, has done this. But Lazarus is going to die again. But he hasn't yet entered the mystery of the deep resurrection, where in the power of God, we can do sorts of things that are unbelievable. And so I think we come, this day, and we celebrate this Sunday, and this walk of discipleship that Lent is all about. Two things maybe we could take away from this in the times that we live. Martha and Mary, for one, when they were in deep need, their brother was dying, he was deeply ill. They invited the Lord into their life. In this time maybe of the COVID-19 and the devastation it seems to be racking across the world, we need to have that same sense of inviting the Lord, because we can't do much. They couldn't stop their brother Lazarus from dying, They're not the ones who shouted, Lazarus, come out, because we are that limited being. But the other point is when we invite Christ into these moments, it's unbelievable what a spiritual life can do and what the depth of life is really all about, because God is about love and God is about life. And we can invite him into any hellhole that we want to. If we invite him in, he's not going to be limited by things like death. The power of God is unbelievable and majestic for all those who walk in that same gift of faith and love. And so I invite us in these last days, these 11 days yet to go in this Lenten season, that we would walk with that kind of stature of faith that we see in Martha and Mary, though limited, sometimes superficial, sometimes like the disciples, shallow, not perceptive at all. But with the Lord, much can be done and much good can happen.